From the headquarters of Tell Us Your English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says elections are needed to overcome the country's economic difficulties. In a wide-ranging news conference with the international media, Maduro also talked about the threat of U.S. oil sanctions, which he said would hurt the United States more than Venezuela, and the question of security on the border with Colombia. He said he wants to win April's presidential election fairly and squarely, and believes this will enable a new era of prosperity.
In order to win this economic war, we need to go to elections and win the elections. I have promised and made a commitment to Venezuela, and I have said, as surely as my name is Nicolás Maduro, when we win these elections, I will guarantee you economic stability and balanced prices, and we will begin a period of economic prosperity.
President Maduro also repeated his call for a meeting with Colombia to draw up a plan for peace and security on their shared border. He said that President Santos's decision to move more troops to the border had been motivated by the visit of Rex Tillerson, but it was still an opportunity to promote peace.
That is why I have proposed that our Defense Minister Padrino call Villegas, the Colombian Defense Minister, to agree this weekend to set a date for a meeting between the ministers of both countries to draw up a binational plan for peace and security for the whole border region, and most importantly, in the state of Táchira.
The Venezuelan foreign minister is now in El Salvador, meeting with government and civil society organizations. We go to our correspondent, Esther Yanez, in the capital of San Salvador for more details.
Greetings from the residence of the Embassy of Venezuela in San Salvador, where today the Foreign Minister of Venezuela, Jorge Ariaza, continues his dignity tour. A private lunch was held earlier this afternoon with the political commission of the FMLN, which has shown its support for Venezuela. A meeting with different organizations and social movements is taking place. They are also presenting Minister Ariaza with a statement expressing their solidarity and support for Venezuela. This stop in El Salvador is part of the tour that the Foreign Minister, Jorge Ariaza, is taking, which goes through various countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. He's been on this tour for weeks now, strengthening ties of friendship, solidarity, and brotherhood between these countries. Later tonight, Ariaza will arrive in the Dominican Republic. He will complete this week's tour. Aside from those political and social movement meetings, he's also held a meeting here in El Salvador with President Salvador Sánchez Serén and Foreign Minister Hugo Martinez. Next week, he'll resume his tour, traveling to countries in Europe and Africa. We'll be following the minister with updates and will continue to bring you updates.
We thank Esther for her report. The governments of Ecuador and Colombia have signed an agreement that will create a computer database which will allow the two states to share migratory alerts to facilitate the flow of people between the two countries. The measure was decided at a binational presidential and cabinet meeting in the Colombian city of Pereira. It will make it possible for the two countries to be alerted automatically to any pending warrants. Ecuador also committed to remaining the headquarters of the dialogue between the Colombian government and the ELN. A human rights defender has been assassinated in Bogotá during the meeting between the Ethnic and Popular Agrarian Summit and the government. Our correspondent, Jose Manuel Jimenez, has more.
In the last hours, social organizations have denounced an attack against a human rights defender, Germán Espinel, in the city of Bogotá. The attack was carried out by two armed men on a motorcycle in one of the capital's popular neighborhoods. According to social organizations, the human rights defender is in good health, as he was wearing a bulletproof vest when he was attacked. This attack occurred while meetings between the Ethnic and Popular Agrarian Summit and the government to define the strategies to protect the social leaders and defenders of human rights. To this date, 30 social leaders have been assassinated, and since the signing of the peace agreement between the FARC and the government, more than 200 social leaders have been assassinated. Back to you.
The summit is a chance for the campesino movement to present their demands to the Colombian government. During the meeting, social organizations reported that more than 200 social leaders have been killed in Colombia since the Havana peace agreement. They blamed the authorities for not doing enough to stop these crimes, and they demanded that the president, Juan Manuel Santos, address their concerns and put aside the constant attacks on Venezuela.
The government hasn't the responsibility of a lack of control measures. There are no measures against the paramilitary attacks on our territories. There are no actions to fulfill the peace agreement with the FARC group, no actions to reactivate the peace talks with the ELN group and stop the armed conflict. In this context, indigenous campesinos and Afro-descendant communities are in serious vulnerable situations.
Late last month, the Colombian Air Force bombarded a remote area of the Tutu department. The government said it was an operation against ELN guerrillas, but the bombs landed in an indigenous reserve, and at least one indigenous child was killed. Our correspondent, Lorena Hoyos, has traveled to the region, and this is the first of her reports.
We navigated for 4 hours through the San Juan River, from Buenaventura to the indigenous safe house of Chacpi and Tordo. The territory was recently bombarded by military forces who say they were fighting the ELN guerrilla. The bombs hit the banks of the Tordo River, close to the homes of the community.
I needed a little hut to plant food. I used to come here to fish or to hunt. I support my children with that food.
The community took us to the attack site. They showed us the huts where they worked, which have now been destroyed. We could feel the pain in their silence and see it through their eyes. But they could have lost more than their livelihood that night. They could have lost their lives.
If we would have been here, we would have been dead. At least we wouldn't be seeing any of this.
The indigenous communities are now afraid to go back to the Tordo River for fear the attacks could come again. They are also concerned military forces will mistake them for ELN guerrillas and capture, or worse, kill them.
We are enduring hunger because we cannot go over there. We are afraid because of the attacks, as we don't know when that can happen again. We're scared.
The indigenous people of the region also believe some explosives are still in their territory.
The Afro-Indigenous population sees this as a direct attack to the campesinos. A war cannot be appeased this way, killing people, killing civilians, going against communities, damaging their crops and homes. That is not the way to end the war. Maybe we need new political measures and for new dialogue about peace.
After leaving the Tordo River, we went to a farmhouse at the indigenous safe house in Chacpian. The Wunan community members say they wanted to escape the attack on a motorboat that night, but they didn't, because they feared that could be even more dangerous.
We could see a small plane overflying the area. The attack scared our children. The adults got together and we saw the motorboat that was ready to leave. The people of the community were ready to leave.
Food shortages have begun. Community leaders are now distributing tuna and rice contributed by nearby community. Uncertainty is growing, but the people are still too fearful to continue with their daily lives.
We take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting on.
That one day this nation will rise up.
If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your savior.
Welcome back. A date has been set for the trial of the famed Mexican drug lord El Chapo. Joaquin Guzman will be tried in a U.S. court on September 5th on charges of drug trafficking and conspiracy. Guzman has been in solitary confinement in a prison in New York since he was extradited to the U.S. in January last year. 60-year-old Guzman is accused of running a global cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine operation. He wanted to address the court to discuss his health and jail conditions, but was not allowed to. The indigenous candidate in Mexico's election, Marjorie Patricio, has been injured in an attack in Baja California. One person died in that accident. Marjorie is now out of danger. The Secretary of Work and Social Security, Alfonso Navarrete, tweeted that she's stable and her life is not at risk. Doctors at the Mexican Social Security Institute, where she's being treated, say she continues to be monitored. A Salvadorian woman serving a 30-year jail sentence for having an abortion has been released from prison. Theodora Vasquez was greeted by her family and campaigners who fought her case in the courts. As she left a woman's rehabilitation center outside San Salvador, Vasquez was convicted in 2008 of aggravated homicide, months after suffering a stillbirth in her 9th month of pregnancy in 2007. Workers in Argentina continue to protest and demand workers' reinstatement as Macri's government presses ahead with mass layoffs. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, is following the protests.
We are now in the center of Argentina's capital, where an important public workers' mobilization is taking place. They're asking to reincorporate 3,300 public workers dismissed this year. They represent 58% of the layoffs in the country, enforced by the government of Mauricio Macri. In each case, they have been removed from important and strategic sectors, as the national industry and the scientific and technology research fields. Macri continues to apply smothering policies which are causing mass unemployment in the public sector. This has transformed the country over the last years. It's a really difficult situation, and it developed into this kind of mobilizations, block of the main roads of Buenos Aires, popular kitchens, and groups of workers demanding to immediately bring back the fired workers. They have said that they will remain on the streets fighting and protesting for workers' rights.
While the violent 2017 hurricane season damaged Caribbean tourism, the region did manage to see some growth and even broke new ground with its arrival figures, surpassing 30 million stayovers, which generated $37 billion. But the passage of Maria, Irma, and others and the damage they caused led to reduced tourist arrivals, and the region has only managed to capture 2.3% of the global tourism market. This is much lower than the global average of 6.7%.
Regarding the major Caribbean subregions, the U.S. territories, the Dutch Caribbean, and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States reported declines, while the grouping, dubbed Other Caribbean, comprising of Cancun, Cozumel, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Suriname, which accounts for almost half of all arrivals to the region, recorded an increase of 6%. And the CARICOM grouping recorded an increase of 1.7%.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines has no immediate plans to legalize marijuana. Finance Minister Camilo Gonzalez made that declaration in Parliament. He says the government is considering the legalization of cannabis for medicinal purposes, but have ruled out the possibility of opening up the industry for recreational uses. Even though its cultivation remains illegal, experts say cannabis production earns the Caribbean country about $40 million a year. Around 500 couples from Nicaragua have tied the knot in a special Valentine's Day mass wedding in the capital city of Managua. The mass weddings have been occurring every year on Valentine's Day for the past 15 years. Since the tradition began, more than 12,000 couples from across the country, along with many foreigners, have been married.
My name is Marina Ignatieva, and we are very, very glad that we finally got married today. Thank you to everyone who helped us. Thank you.
Ecuador's Chota Valley is a region known not just for its carnival, but also for its football players and boxers. one of the poorest regions in Ecuador. They use sports to help their family financially. Ivan Castaneda and Mariana Gongora brings us their stories.
Chota Valley is one of the only places in Latin America where Afro-descendant communities were established in the Andes and not next to the ocean. They were brought here as slaves by the Jesuits to work in the plantations.
And Juncal is created by immigrants from Caldera, from La Concepcion, from La Loma, from Cuajara, from Pambacienda. They came here escaping from the other haciendas, or maybe they were taken out of other haciendas, so they got here and formed this community.
This valley is known especially for its boxers and football players that have become famous on various teams in different parts of the world, having won numerous boxing and football championships. But even with all these great athletes, government, private investment and education in the region is still lacking. Children here still look at sports as the only way of helping their families to fight poverty in their homes.
The valley of Chota and Juncal is characterized by being an area that is immersed in poverty. It is an area where social inequality is very noticeable, and sports have been seen as a mechanism to close the gaps of social inequality.
Yes, it is a sport to help my family, my mother, my dad, my grandparents, and also the elderly who need one.
I'm encouraged. I like to push myself to be able to fight well, to train, and to have respect. I help my mom at home. For example, when she's sweeping, I try to help her with whatever she's doing.
I like it when we play a lot of football. I score a goal, I feel joy, happiness. I feel more in my heart that I have played more football.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
So it's incredible now to have the DNA data that really shows us what this guy looked like. You know, the hair, the eyes, the face, that combination of blue eyes and dark skin, really very striking, something we wouldn't have imagined. And to also get from the DNA
Welcome back. Cyril Ramaphosa has become South Africa's president after the embattled leader Jacob Zuma resigned on Wednesday. Ramaphosa was the only person nominated in Parliament, so a vote was not needed to make it official. During his speech to Parliament, the wealthy former businessman said that he would fight corruption.
Issues that have to do with corruption, issues of how we can straighten out our state-owned enterprises, and how we deal with state capture is are issues that are on our radar screen. Those are issues that we're going to be addressing, and tomorrow we will also have an opportunity to outline some of the steps that we are going to be taking.
So, who's the new president of South Africa? The 65-year-old made his name as a trade union leader during the struggle against apartheid, first as president of the National Union of Mine Workers, then as general secretary of the COSATU Confederation. He was Nelson Mandela's pick to negotiate an end to the apartheid regime in the 1990s. In the 1990s, Ramaphosa built a parallel career as a businessman. He became one of the wealthiest politicians in South Africa, with a net worth estimated at $450 million. He has long said that corruption is at the root of his country's problems. Last December, he replaced President Jacob Zuma as president of the African National Congress. Now, he has replaced him as president of the Republic.
Work with all political parties.
South African Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu has stepped down as an ambassador for Oxfam. Tutu said in a statement, he was deeply disappointed by the immorality and possible criminality involving the British charity's humanitarian workers in Haiti after the massive earthquake in 2010. Following 8 years of austerity policies, the streets of Athens are falling apart due to a lack of maintenance. This, along with chaotic urban planning, makes the city increasingly difficult for people who use wheelchairs or those with limited mobility.
Sotiris knows how difficult it is to move around these streets. He was born with achondroplasia and didn't take his first steps until he was 6 years old.
Despite the difficulties, I go out and try to do the things I want to do. But doing what you want isn't always easy, because I have to consider how accessible places are going to be.
The elevator down to the subway is out of order, so we help him use the escalator. Austerity policies mean that utilities like this break down regularly.
There is money, but it's misused, so utilities are not repaired and they become unusable.
There are many places in the city where he can't go, so he must carefully plan his journey.
It's tragic to see how difficult it is, and it's not just the government's fault. People are at fault too. For example, they know that ramps on sidewalks are for wheelchairs, yet they still block the ramps with their cars.
The first thing you notice about Alexandra is her vitality. She's a Paralympic swimmer who's been in a wheelchair since she was 7. She approaches the city with confidence. She says she would prefer to fall out of her wheelchair than to be stuck inside.
On the sidewalks, usually there are trees or staircases, or the sidewalk is broken.
Because of this, she travels around on the road despite the city's heavy traffic.
It would be nice to have better streets, with well-placed streetlights and without any potholes.
Despite winning plenty of medals, Alexandra has to pay for her own plane tickets to get to competitions. She receives no public or private aid, along with Sotiris. They are examples of the struggle those with limited mobility face every day.
Moving ahead, let's have a look at some other news from around the world.
At least 17 people have been killed in a shooting at a Florida school. The victims included students and adults. The police have identified the attacker as 19-year-old former student Nicholas Cruz, who was expelled on disciplinary grounds. He has been taken into custody. There have been 18 gun attacks in U.S. schools this year. Annually, there are nearly 33,000 deaths related to gun violence in the U.S. A French court has sentenced 2 men linked to the 2015 Paris attacks, in which 130 people were killed. The Islamic State group claimed responsibility for the attack. Another suspect, Javed Vendouad, who rented his apartment to the attackers, was acquitted by the court as nothing suspicious was found against him.
It's a bit of mixed feelings because at the same time a just decision concerning the first 2 suspects and a decision that will appear to civil parties as unusual for the man who provided accommodation for the terrorist, who was Jawad bin Daoud, which can be interpreted as, even if we are part of the circle, we can get away with it. So we hope that the prosecution will appeal this decision with regard to Jawad bin Daoud.
42-year-old Sebastian Uprimny has become the first athlete from Colombia to participate in the cross-country event in the Winter Olympics. Colombia sent a small delegation of 4 athletes. All of them are first-timers and in their 40s. They will be participating in skating and skiing events. For Skier Sebastian, it's a dream come true.
I just decided this crazy dream to happen. So it's a different story. I'm not the full-time athlete. I'm more the journeyman who had a dream and who wanted to make it happen.
Hundreds of Boko Haram suspects have been brought to trial in an open court in Kanji in central Nigeria. The court will decide whether they will be prosecuted, sentenced or released. Earlier this week, the first suspect from the group was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Boko Haram is being tried for militant insurgency and involvement in the kidnapping of more than 200 schoolgirls from the town of Chibok in 2014.
And finally, a spectacular show of molten iron art has been performed in the city of Zhangjiakou in North China to mark the Chinese New Year. In the display, artists hurl molten iron with temperatures as high as 1600 degrees Celsius against the wall. The burning metal is turned into an arc of sparks. The tradition of burning iron display is more than 500 years old. This performance is part of the annual Spring Festival and Light Show. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
Mi nombre es Hilario Hernández Sánchez, soy originario de Metepec, Estado de México.